what employers need to know about Glassdoor, next on the Rec Tech Podcast.
Welcome to Rec Tech, the recruiting technology show where we highlight interesting HR recruitment technologies, as well as talking with recruiters on how they use it to recruit and manage their talent. Today's show will be a recruiter edition. My name is Chris Russell. They call me the mad scientist of online recruiting, and today my job is to consult with HR tech vendors on marketing strategy and product development at rectechmedia.com. I also help HR departments with the occasional HR tech advice, so feel free to give me a call. But first, the Rec Tech Podcast is sponsored by Beyond.com and their popular text-to-hire text messaging service. Text-to-hire is a text recruitment solution that gives you instant mobile access to the candidates you want to reach for high-quality one-on-one conversations. We're all on our phones constantly, so if you have that one tough position you need to fill or just want to break through the clutter and connect with candidates in a very unique way, reach out with them on a device that's already in their hands, their smartphone. So right now, Beyond is offering our listeners 10% off your first text-to-hire campaign. Just go to beyond.com/rectech, that's beyond.com/RECTECH, to learn more and find out how many people you can reach. All right. Christopher Kurtz is the founder and managing director of Thru. Thru is an independent advisory founded by himself that specializes in the 4 pillars of employer branding, employee assessments, and leadership development. He's also a former employee of Glassdoor, the subject of today's show. Chris, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's great to be with you. We've been plotting and planning on this for quite some time, and I'm thankful to be here and make it happen.
Yeah, it was a pleasure meeting you at Recruit DC last year, back in the, I think it was May, right?
Absolutely.
We spoke at the event. Didn't get a chance to hear you then, but we'll rectify that today with our podcast here. So again, thank you for coming on and talking about Glassdoor. It's Glassdoor appears to have become a sort of rite of passage for many job seekers out there while doing their homework on their prospective employers. So from your perspective, Chris, what kind of impact is Glassdoor having in the market today on their recruiting efforts for companies?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I look at that in a couple different lenses. One impact is definitely from the candidate perspective. And I think about just a really simple example. About a year and a half ago, I was on a red-eye flight to New York City, and there was a young lady sitting next to me who had just graduated. She was looking for her first job in the job market. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, we started talking about what she was looking at. So she's in New York. So if you think about just a major hub of opportunity and what she was sharing with me, and yet her challenge was finding an opportunity. And it was really cool because, thanks to Wi-Fi on an airplane now, we were able to pull up Glassdoor. We talked about what she specialized in, what she wanted to specialize in, mm-hmm. the types of companies she was interested in. And by the time we landed in New York City, we had found, I want to say, over 3,000 opportunities, that kind of fit her job description and what she was looking at and the ratings of the companies. So from that perspective, it gave her, just as it describes, their mission is to help people find jobs and companies they love. And it gave her that opportunity to really look into an organization and read reviews and take a look at it. But it also has that impact on the flip side from the employer side. So for the employers themselves, the impact is pretty dramatic because it's brought this whole element of transparency. And we hear that a lot. I mm-hmm. think more of what we're looking for now is authenticity. So from an employer standpoint, when you think about employer branding, Glassdoor hits on all 4 pillars, from recruitment marketing, where you can truly market a message, to recruiting. You get a good perspective of who's coming and looking at your jobs and from where. Onboarding, take a look at your interview reviews and what are your candidates saying about your onboarding process, mm-hmm. all the way through talent management. That's the bulk of the reviews, if you look at them, are going to reflect talent management, in that pillar. Yeah. But it does bring to light, those four key elements of employer branding. Yeah,
and you mentioned authenticity there, which I think is the heart of what a job seeker seeks today, in looking for a job. They really want to know what it's like to work there, and I think Glassdoor helps them find that. So authenticity is, a word that job seekers or a phrase that job seekers, didn't always have access to, but now they do. So, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I think there is that perception of we have to be perfect. I heard it earlier again today with another organization that, we want to do certain things, but we've got to get everything perfect first. And, we're pretty forgiving. If you look at just your own buying style, we're willing to buy things if it has 3 stars, if, the 3 stars outweigh the 1s and the 2s. It's the same way with job seekers. They'll go in, whether it's on Glassdoor, on Indeed, or another review site, and as long as there's not anything egregious out there, you don't have to have the perfect organization, nor do job seekers anticipate that.
Yeah. Are there any common misperceptions about Glassdoor that you hear?
I think that ties back to one that I just stated, and that is one misperception is that you do have to be perfect. Candidates want authenticity. But I think the greater one from the employer perspective is that, it's negative leaning or that it's a rant site. And we don't hear that as much anymore in the market space. But the misconception really is that everybody's going there and using it. And, few job seekers or, Glassdoor does a great job of marketing, but they're still getting their word out as a tool for job seekers to use. They do an excellent job partnering with career centers and universities. But I think the biggest misperception is that, everything that's there is either negative or it's left by former employees, and that really isn't the truth. If you go in and do a simple analysis, you can really look at, where the reviews are being left from, where they're at in their career cycle, current versus former employees, and then glean some great information from it.
Yeah. So I just have a question. What percentage of the reviews on there are left by former employees versus sort of current ones? Do you have any idea on that?
Glassdoor could probably speak to this better. It's difficult because, I could go in as a current employee in 2015 and leave a review and then leave the organization, midway through, and that review is going to remain on Glassdoor. But by and large, if I do analysis for an organization, it'll break out somewhere around 60-40, where 60% may be from a former employee versus current, 40% being current. And then, you can break it down from there, depending on the organization, how much weighting do they want to put into that. If we work with an organization specifically on reviews, we'll try and look at just the last 2 years. And Glassdoor is really great to work with in that regard in terms of accessibility and being able to sort by time, for example. So you can pull the data and look at it in a more recent snapshot.
Gotcha. So when a client comes to you, Chris, kind of where do you begin? Is it typically more of, hey, we're having trouble on Glassdoor with our rating, how can you help us? Or tell us more about how that works.
Yeah, so some will definitely begin with that. And if the question is, how do we get a higher score? I always try and back up one step, and that is, what are we trying to accomplish? If we're trying to accomplish just to have 5 stars on Glassdoor, is that really a true reflection of the organization? Because that is going to, create obviously more groundwork. Maybe we have to work on communication, or we have to work on transparency around talent management, for example. So I always back up one step and say, what is it that we really want? If it's authenticity, maybe there aren't things we need to fix, but maybe we just highlight or accentuate, what's really out there. And I also start too with, organizations say, do we have to buy Glassdoor to make it, to make changes or to work with them? And there's a lot you can do on Glassdoor with a free employer account. And what I recommend from the first step with anyone is just get on there like anything else, click on a few pages, open up a few tabs, and get to know it. So, even if you have a free employer account and you take a look at your reviews, you can hover over your ratings and trends, and it gives you a wealth of information that you can then begin to take action on before you even invest, with Glassdoor for either recruiting or branding purposes.
What's the difference between a free account and a paid account on Glassdoor for an employer? What can they do versus they can't do if they pay?
Yeah, so on your paid account, it'd be similar to owning any sort of a domain space. On a paid account, you have control or full access of your enhanced profile or employer profile on Glassdoor. It also blocks vendors, other not vendors, excuse me, but maybe talent competitors from advertising on your page.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives you access to put your own branding on there. So full control in the why work for us space, which is really where most companies are going to tell their story. And it also pulls in from your job feed as well. So they integrate really nicely into, I think, virtually any ATS that's out there now. And, they'll scrape your job feed. They put it right there front and center. Without that, if you have a free account and you're just using it from a free employer perspective, you have limited reporting. You have kind of a high-level overview of the reporting, but you can't really dig too far into it.
Mm-hmm.
And your talent competitors do have access to advertise on your space. So they've got a few tools and products that you can use within the site as well for talent attraction.
Yeah. Now, if you pay, is it easier to get your ranking up in that case? Is there any kind of pay to play there? I've heard those rumors, but
there's not. I would say that's a misperception too. It's interesting when people say if you pay so much, and that really kind of goes back to the Yelp days. And I don't mean to call anyone out on Yelp, but what was that? 2012, 2013. They kind of came into the spotlight for, paid companies have higher reviews or reviews go away, and Glassdoor doesn't, and that largely comes back to their mission. They really want to be authentic. They want companies to be transparent. And even having worked there, for 3 years, I can tell you, working with some big logos, globally recognized logos, probably daily I would get a phone call to ask for a review to be taken down.
Mm-hmm.
And, Glassdoor is really great about their integrity in terms of, if it meets the guidelines, it stays on there because we want people to see what's authentic. And I'll give you one example, Chris, is, if you think about some of the most egregious reviews that get hit on Glassdoor, and, one of them is sexual harassment. If you imagine a sexual harassment claim being on Glassdoor,
right.
HR hears about it, the CEO, everyone in the organization, right, bells and whistles go off everywhere. And
has that happened?
Oh, yeah, it does. But interestingly enough, if you talk to an employee, and it's not uncommon, who has experienced sexual harassment, they're really appreciative of a review like that, or they would want to know about it before going into work for an organization. So yeah, we take those reviews very seriously, and if if a company can quote unquote prove or disprove, they'll take it into consideration. But if it's something that's going to protect or be in the best interest of the candidate looking at that job, why would they want to take it down?
Yeah. Who should own the Glassdoor relationship at the employer? Is there a specific person you typically see it handled by?
Most commonly it lands in TA. Glassdoor still, because it interfaces with job seekers and the candidate, that's largely where it ends up, is in talent acquisition space, which most commonly will roll up within human resources somewhere. But the most successful organizations that I've seen in terms of managing their employer brand, and not just on Glassdoor, but with Glassdoor as a component of their employer brand, it's equally shared. So you'll have public relations, you'll have a seat at the table, you'll have marketing communication, you'll have marketing, even client or consumer marketing, you'll have human resources, somebody within onboarding, and each of them will have some shared responsibility of what is on Glassdoor. Again, coming back to my first point that Glassdoor hits on all four pillars of employer branding. Well, the best way to really kind of share the information and make a positive impact is to have various people in the organization owning some part of that as well.
Right. Chris, what are some of the pitfalls that you see TA or HR managers make with regard to Glassdoor?
Oh, man. I think the most common, Chris, is I just call it set it and forget it. I talked about this in Recruit DC, that image of, I can't remember his name, where he puts the turkey in the oven and he sets it for 3 hours, and that's the tagline, is set it and forget it. I think one of the most common pitfalls is, clients will purchase Glassdoor, or they'll do something on Glassdoor, and they don't come back and revisit it for several months or even for a year. And there's a wealth of information in there. So, and I think that the pitfall, it's natural. Your human resource leaders are strapped with a lot of the processes and what's going on in the organization. Your talent acquisition people are largely focused on getting good talent through the doors and keeping hiring managers happy. So, one of the biggest pitfalls is they'll set it, but they don't really do anything with the information that's on the back end or the great reviews that are coming in that could create actionable insights for the organization. And I think the other one that's most common, and it ties to that first point, is not responding. You see a review will come on, and it may be great, or it may be negative. And if an employer has an account, or even if they don't, and they just leave that review out there, it's silence in the wind. And one of the best practices that you can find is organizations where they actively respond. And they'll have a strategy put in place for both positive and negative, and how do they share and how do they respond to those reviews.
Yeah. When it comes to responding, what kind of advice do you have there for employers, especially when it comes to, calming the some of the rants that can take place on there about their company? How do you how do you advise employers address that? What should they say?
Yeah, so the one thing especially if it's emotionally charged, my first piece of advice is probably one that our parents often gave us growing up, which is to sleep on it. Remove yourself just a little bit from the emotion of it and take a look at how your response is going to resonate, with what's going on. And the way Glassdoor is set up, it's not like a Facebook or a Twitter where, that thread can go on in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. But once an employer responds to a review, negative or positive, that thread stops. They kind of have the final say in communication there. So I think from an employer standpoint, one piece of advice I would give there is think about what you're going to put out there, acknowledge it, and maybe even talk about what you're doing to work on it and improve it. And there's some great examples out there from companies where, maybe people will come in and say sales is a mess or the compensation plan's a disaster or whatever it is. And I see great reviews where the VP of sales or even the CEO, him or herself, will respond and say, we're growing, we're struggling, thanks for the feedback, we're working on this, if you've got some ideas around it, our door is open, and I think those types of reviews, if you look at the response from them as well, candidates that then see the employer response will click on, this was helpful, and they like to know that they're being heard.
So being proactive is probably the overarching, best strategy here, right?
Doing something. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you put yourself in a position of, just think about yourself. You create this great post or a funny thought, you put it out on Facebook and nobody likes it. How does that feel? And it's the same thing on Glassdoor. These employees, they're your people, and they take the time to put something out there. And sometimes, it comes at the end of the job. Maybe they've lost their job or they've been terminated or whatever. So it may be emotionally charged, and some are really impassioned about where they work. So, they type it and retype it, and they ask their friends, does this look okay? And then they hit send. And when there's no response to it, they're like, well, I was right. Nobody really cared. So, doing something or taking some sort of action on there. And if you're a huge organization, you can imagine that could become a full-time job. And that's where I often consult on a strategy.
Yeah.
If you get 1,000 reviews a month, you seriously can't do that. But you can put together a strategy that says this is what we will respond to, or who in the organization should respond, and that kind of helps share that load as well.
Yeah, Chris, what happens when? Give us a peek inside of this in terms of when a job seeker posts a review on Glassdoor. What happens internally at Glassdoor? Is there a machine that's reading that, looking for things like bad language? Is there a human reviewing all of these? What goes on the back end?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I mean, there's some really brilliant programmers there at Glassdoor, as you can imagine. They hire some extremely bright people. And so there are, sets of algorithms that will look for, language, names, for example. If I'm a mid-level manager and someone comes in and says, Chris Kurtz is a real a-hole, for example, it would flag that. An algorithm would pick that up because it's used the first and the last name. So the executives that can be named on there are any executive that would also be found on a public report. Mm-hmm. So if I go to a company's, 10K at the end of the year and I look at a public report, I could call out by name, the CFO, the CHRO, the CEO. Those executives are kind of fair game, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. But they're also leadership. They're accountable for the direction of the culture or the orientation of the organization. So those algorithms will catch names. They do pick up on swear words. You mentioned that. Glassdoor also looks at the content, and you look at companies will say, what does it take to be a best place to work? And they don't just look at the total number of reviews, quantity of reviews. They look at the quality. And if I would give any advice to someone saying, hey, I want to leave a review on Glassdoor, what should I say? Leave a quality review. Take some time to list some pros, take some time to list some cons. No organization's perfect. But just going in and, just spewing and this sucks and I can't even describe why, I'm just upset, well, that doesn't benefit anybody. So from a candidate perspective, take some time to review it. And then what happens in Glassdoor, the review goes through the algorithm as long as it doesn't get held up by any, swear words or, and they do allow some swear words, by the way, but first and last names or anything that's going to, we don't want anyone's career to go down in flames either. Mm-hmm. As long as that passes, then it actually does go to human content for review. So there's a content team. They do look at the reviews, and then they will pass that on. So as an employer, what's the process? If I'm not happy with a review or if I don't think it fairly reflects where I'm at, you can flag it, and it does go through a review process. Mm-hmm. But I often recommend, too, for any organization, Glassdoor has their kind of terms and conditions very clearly stated on the website. So before you flag a review or get into a big, review process, take a look at the terms and conditions, and if you can see that they're going to clearly come back and say, no, the review's going to stay, then save your time.
How about some stories, Chris? You worked here for 3 years. What are some of your favorite stories that came as a result of a Glassdoor review, either positive or negative? I'm curious.
Yeah, this is probably why, even after, leaving Glassdoor, really what pushed me into where I'm at now and why I'm still so passionate about it. There's a couple stories. One I think of, if you really look at the content and you read some reviews and you kind of triangulate a little bit, you pick up common themes. And one of my favorite stories, it came from a large retailer out of Florida. This is in regard to recruiting. And there was a candidate review on the interview process that just said, if you show up with a pulse and a driver's license, you'll get the job. So head of talent acquisition calls, and, she's really upset. Hey, we've got to take this down. This isn't true. And I just asked, I said, hey, tell me about your recruitment and onboarding process. And it made her kind of take pause and think about it. How do your hiring managers interview? Do they have a format? Are there certain, behavioral interviews that they go through? And she's like, I got to look into that. And it was interesting. She came back to me and she said, we found out that our hiring managers don't have a common practice. We don't really have, best practices in place with regard to the interview process. Some were administering the drug test, some were not. Some would ask a set of, interview questions. Most were not. It was just kind of all over the board. So they rolled out this whole manager training, how to conduct an interview. Here's behavioral questions. Here's the process. They made sure everyone was on board with it. And sure enough, about, I would say 6, maybe 9 months later, another review hit the company and it said, interview process was more difficult than I thought based on previous reviews. So they'd gone and said, if I just show up with my driver's license, I'm good. But what was cool is the review actually said, I'm grateful I got the job, or thankful I got the job, or something like that. And, following up with this head of TA, we talked about that. Now, the impact of that simple review was they rolled out a formal process, they trained the managers, but what's even better is she noted that their quality of hire actually went up. So if you're a retail organization and you have a higher quality of hire, what does that mean for your customer interaction? What does that mean for productivity? And, to this day, that's probably one of my favorite stories as relates to, the interview reviews from a Glassdoor perspective.
When it comes to the really proactive employers on there, what types of things are they doing? Are they telling their employees to leave reviews? Are they asking for reviews from past employees? How much of that goes on?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, right before I spoke at Recruit DC, Celinda Appleby, who, as you know, is at Nike now, she was kind enough to warn me. She said, listen, this is the first question you're going to get asked, and that's kind of what you're asking is, every company wants to know, how do we, A, get more reviews, and B, how do we get more positive reviews, right? Who doesn't want to put their best foot forward? And we hear that all the time. So there are some best and worst practices, and Glassdoor talks about this too. I saw companies that would offer, breakfast burritos. If you would just bring a copy of your review to the HR office, they'd give you a coupon for a breakfast burrito. We would see companies that would offer Starbucks for reviews. Those are all the no-nos, and that does get flagged, by the way, at Glassdoor. If you have an organization that traditionally trickles in, 1 or 2 reviews a month and also may get 25 in the same week, flags tend to go off on that. But it's disingenuous. It doesn't really reflect positively on your organization either, and your people know that. So some of the best practices we've seen is to really integrate it with your process. So if you're a candidate coming through the process, whether they get the job or not, send them a link, to your Glassdoor profile and say, hey, we'd love to hear about your interview experience. We're constantly trying to improve that.
Right.
And, 1-year anniversaries, one of my favorite subtle tips or tricks is if you have a company newsletter, highlight a review in your newsletter and address it. Have one of your senior executives say, hey, this review is on Glassdoor. Appreciate whoever left this. It is anonymous. And then write a response to it. It's a really subtle way to let your people know that you are listening and you are responding and you're aware of what's out there. And that does have an influence on more people going out and responding to reading reviews on Glassdoor. Feedback, I would say.
Yeah, I like that tip. It's a great little tactic there to subtly tell your employees to go check it out. Well, Chris, we certainly appreciate the time today. A lot of great information about Glassdoor and what to do. What are your parting thoughts as we end the show here?
If I just had one, I would just say kind of how we started and use the word authenticity. The world is clamoring for authenticity right now. Job seekers are looking for it. And we saw a great example in Jeff Bezos with Amazon when they got a lot of really negative press for work-life balance. And Jeff Bezos was unapologetic, and he just said, hey, we'll look at it, but we want people who are driven to be here with us. And, that level of authenticity actually endeared, I think, more people to Amazon and what they were about. So if I had one parting thought, it would be to engage and to be authentic and own who you are.
Chris Kurtz from Thru, thanks for joining me today. How can people connect with you?
Oh, man, if you can't find me on social media, I don't exist. You can find me at peerthru.com. I'm on Twitter at peerthru. I'm on Facebook at peerthru. I'm on Instagram at peerthru. I'm not on Pinterest, Chris, but you can find me in any one of those locations. You can also email me direct at chris@peerthru.com.
All right, that's THRU, right?
That's correct.
All right, Chris. Well, again, we certainly appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Chris. What a pleasure to reconnect.
That will do for this edition of the RecTech Podcast. Thanks again to our sponsor, and remember to check out beyond.com/RecTech for that special offer of 10% off to their text-to-hiring service. I'm Chris Russell. Follow me on Twitter at Chris Russell or visit rectechmedia.com. You'll be able to find the audio and links for this show on our blog. You can also listen on iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud now, so check us out. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.